Hey everyone, Minutia Minute here coming at you guys with the epilogue to my video game movie marathon that I did for the channel this week. If you watched my Sunday video, you'll know that I got through 6 video game movies, but there was one missing because I hadn't been able to go out and see the new Uncharted movie in theaters, which was actually the impetus for doing a video game movie week in the first place. So as of the recording of this video, I've actually just gotten back from the theater with Minutia Wife, where we went to go see the Uncharted movie starring Tom Holland. Now, before I get into my thoughts on the movie itself, I'm just going to take a minute and just share a little bit of Uncharted street cred. This is the first video game I think I've ever shown on this channel. Actually, no, I take that back. When Batman Arkham City came out, I think I showed that off because I was so excited about that Batman game. So this is the second video game I've ever shown on this channel. I'm one of those PlayStation nerds that picked up a PS3 very close to launch. It wasn't at launch, but it was in the phase when they were just getting ready to phase out the backwards compatibility. It still had emulation backwards compatibility, mammoth system, not a lot of games for it. I was able to pick up Uncharted Drake's Fortune on day one. I basically blew all the spare cash I had for it. I remember eating like ramen for a week because I had to have this game. I thought it looked so cool. Got it home. It did not disappoint. I absolutely love the Uncharted games, and it started right here with the very first game and continued all throughout the PS3 life cycle. Uncharted 2 came out right around the time that PlayStation 3 was kind of rebranding, kind of getting its footing. People are actually starting to buy PlayStation 3s. And Uncharted 2 was exactly the shock to the system that the console needed to really propel it through the second half of that generation. Now, as much of a masterpiece as Uncharted 2 is considered to be, one complaint about this series from more hardcore gamers than me is that these games are actually too much like movies. There's a lot of, guided gameplay, a lot of holding your hand, quick time events, sort of things that are set up to make the game feel like you're living a movie more so than just being a great game with really solid gameplay elements that really drive the story forward. Now, I like both types of video games, but as a movie fan, you can do way worse than playing any of the Dude Raider games. Throughout the course of the series, they did a really, really good job of developing Nathan Drake as a character so that he was just a little bit more than the man in the hat, so to speak, to make an Indiana Jones reference. His relationship with Sully, the various girlfriends and eventual wife that he has, makes the character just a little bit more depthful, so that by the time we got to the PlayStation 4 and they remastered the first 3 games and then put out the 4th game, I at least was very connected with Nathan Drake as a character, and seeing the kind of journey he goes on in this game in particular, where he has a wife, kids, but he's kind of drawn back into the adventuring universe. He has a relationship with his brother that's estranged, and it really felt like with Uncharted 4, they really put a nice bow on the narrative of the series, to the point that as much as I would play an Uncharted 5, and we did get the Uncharted Lost Legacy game a couple years later, it's not something I'm necessarily clamoring for. That said, from day one, I always wanted to have the chance to see Nathan Drake on the big screen and just sit down, kick back, relax, and watch a proper Uncharted movie in the theaters. As I said in my last video, my tastes have somewhat matured. I'm not quite as willing to trust, Sony as a film company and any property that's a video game made into a movie, because we've been burned thousands of times now at this point on that as a concept. But if anyone could do it, it was Uncharted, because the games are so filmic to the point that it actually can hold them back as video games to a degree. And so now, literally 15 years after that first Uncharted game came out, I got my wish. Now, if you're someone who doesn't want any spoilers whatsoever, I'll let you guys know where it fits in the grand scheme of my total marathon in terms of ranking. And then once that's done, just click off the video, go see the movie, and feel free to come back once you've seen it. So in the grand scheme of the movies that I marathoned up to this point, it's going to fall somewhere in the middle. It's definitely 1,000 times better than Monster Hunter, which I hated. It's solidly ahead of Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City. And then here's where we get in the weeds. I'm not sure if it's better than Tomb Raider. To me, it was very much on par. Not just because they're both treasure hunting movies, but because neither movie was perfect, but the positives certainly outweighed the negatives. There's one thing I think narratively that Uncharted does better than Tomb Raider, so I'm inclined to say I liked it more than Tomb Raider. However, it's definitely not better than Sonic, Werewolves Within, or of course, Scott Pilgrim. So for those of you guys who are still here, let's really quick talk about the things that I didn't care for, that I didn't think worked very well, before we get into the positives, because there were actually quite a few positives about this movie that I really appreciated. One of the things that really stands out to me about the original Uncharted game and carried forward through all the other games was the score. It has a super memorable soundtrack, and the people coding the game did a great job integrating the music into the gameplay so that it really does feel like a movie soundtrack, and one of the better movie soundtracks that are out there. So if there's one thing an Uncharted movie really ought to be able to nail, it's that old Hollywood style score that Uncharted has. What we get in this movie instead is honestly kind of like a Marvel movie soundtrack. Like, it feels like temp music that someone just went in and like tweaked a little bit. There are a couple very small moments where you get the classic Uncharted theme song, but it's almost trivialized in how it's orchestrated because they're trying to make it fit into this very lightweight score that the movie has. My second detriment for the movie is Mark Wahlberg. Overall, this movie actually really won me over on their casting choices. I was not a fan of the idea of Tom Holland. I was not a fan of the idea of Mark Wahlberg. In the case of Tom Holland, now that he's a little bit older, he actually fits the Nathan Drake persona a lot better than I kind of realized until I actually saw it on screen. There is an element of studio politics behind that choice, but it doesn't matter. He's actually very well cast. There's kind of a bumbling nature to Nathan Drake as a character, where, they're not afraid to beat up Nathan Drake, put him in a terrible situation, and have him kind of bumble his way out of it, but then, nail it when he has to nail it. And that's actually very true to Tom Holland as kind of a actor persona right now, as someone who previously has played Spider-Man. So it actually fit really well for him, and he rose to the occasion. In the case of Marky Mark, I can actually see a great Sully performance in him. Like, I actually get why they cast him as a little bit younger version of Sullivan. The problem is he didn't rise to the occasion. It just feels like Mark Wahlberg on screen getting a paycheck to me. And here's where we'll get into a little bit of light spoilers. In this movie, he plays a younger Sullivan, and so he doesn't quite have that like heart of gold that he has in the games. But you can see he's a character that's on the journey to becoming the Sullivan that we kind of know and love. But it doesn't really work because Mark Wahlberg plays it cartoonish and dopey to me, rather than like someone that Nathan Drake would actually pair up with and bear through the hard times to get to the greater friendship that's promised by the time you get towards the end of the movie. And so unfortunately for his part, it really took me out of the movie. I don't know how much of that is Mark Wahlberg and how much of that is just kind of inherent in the script and the way they interpreted the character, but there's definitely a combination of the two that just caused it not to work for me. One of the really early story beats in the original Uncharted is the question of whether or not Sullivan betrayed Nathan Drake. And it's this big lingering mystery throughout a decent chunk of the game that only works because at the time it was the first game and we didn't know what Sully was really like. But then we spent, 4 or 5 more games getting to know Sullivan and understand what he's like and why he's with Nathan Drake. And so when you go back and replay that first game, it seems silly that you ever suspected him of foul play. And so to kind of circle back around to that now in the movie just felt kind of like a cheap plot point to me. That said, my Nusha wife disagreed when we were on the car ride home. So that might just be a hardcore Uncharted fan thing, or it might just be this guy whining for no reason. There is actually a third thing I didn't like in this movie, which was the product placement. There's one very specific moment, you will know it when you get to the movie, and you'll hate it too. So with the unpleasantness out of the way, let's just take a moment and talk about a couple of the things that I really loved about this movie. First of all, as I said, Tom Holland does a great job as Nathan Drake. Really clever casting, in my opinion. I can see where, long term, if they make 3-4 of these movies, Tom Holland is really going to grow into that part. Mark Wahlberg could potentially really grow into that part, and you could have something really special down the road if this is intended to be sort of an Uncharted origin story, and then 3 years from now we get the original Uncharted game made into a movie. They'll be spot on in terms of age and life experience. The second thing I really liked about the movie that put it ahead of Tomb Raider was the way they included puzzle solving in the course of the movie. In the Tomb Raider movie, when you got to the gameplay parts of the movie, it felt like those things were kind of shoehorned in and the movie kind of came to a stop, so then you could now do the things that happen in the video games. Whereas in Uncharted, it's actually very cohesive. There's actually a lot of puzzle solving in the Uncharted movie, but it all is moving the narrative forward. It's all a part of the story. It feels organic. Along the way, they're introducing and developing various different characters, and overall, it feels like a very competent screenplay. And that's going to lead me to my third favorite thing about this movie, which was nailing the tone of Uncharted. Again, getting slightly into mild spoilers. If you've seen the trailer, this really shouldn't be a surprise to you. But midway through the movie, you get basically a reenactment of one of the major set pieces from Uncharted 3. It's actually on the box right here on the back. And they really lean into that over-the-top action set piece thing. And they even, slightly heavier spoilers here, open the movie at the midway point, just like all of the Uncharted games do. So that was cool. It felt like the Uncharted tone. But then we get into some of the set pieces towards the end of the movie that are original to this film, not from any video game. And as I was watching it, I felt like I was seeing someone else play a new Uncharted game that I had never had the chance to play myself. Like, they absolutely nailed the sort of slightly absurd heightened reality of any Uncharted action set piece at the end of the movie. So that was really welcome, really fun to see. And honestly, that's how I'm going to close down this review, which is just to say, overall, I actually had a lot of fun watching this movie. Certainly not the best movie ever, but overall it was fun and I was satisfied. And I went in simultaneously with high hopes and low hopes because it's one of those, I wanted it to be good, I wanted to have fun with it, but I expected to be miserable. And I wasn't miserable. I actually had a smile on my face through a lot of the movie. Afterwards, my wife turned to me and she said, that movie was a lot of fun. And she doesn't like action movies and she just got a kick out of it. She thought it was entertaining. So overall, I think it's a safe bet. Like, if you want to go see just a fun action movie with decent characters, an acceptable story, some silly stunts that make it fun to eat popcorn without completely losing sight of narrative, plot, and characters, you can do way worse than Uncharted. For a movie coming out in February, it's a lot of fun. And I do recommend you check it out if it's something that you're interested in. As long as you're interested in just kind of a lighthearted, fun adventure. So I hope you guys enjoyed this final video game review in my video game marathon. I will be back on Sunday with the next 7 movies in the 365 movie challenge. And in the meantime, I hope you guys have a great week in movies. Thanks for watching.